Hi, everyone. Welcome to MJH Live, the online public program series of New York's Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm Samantha Shokin, Manager of Public Programs, and today we will be taking a behind-the-scenes look at Unorthodox, the hit Netflix TV series starring Shira Haas, about a young Orthodox woman from Williamsburg, Brooklyn, who runs away to Berlin to begin a new secular life. So we are joined today by series co-creator and co-writer Alexa Karolinski, a native Berliner whose works explore the intricate nuances of German-Jewish relations. Alexa's 2018 feature documentary, Lebenszeichen, which means signs of life, portrayed the ways in which German Jews and Gentiles ritualized their historical burden and was released to great critical acclaim in 2018. As I mentioned, Alexa is joining from LA today. Hello, Alexa. We're also joined by actor Eli Rosen, who plays Reb Yossele in the show, and also served as the production's Yiddish translator and consultant. Eli grew up in a Hasidic community in New York, and like Shira in Unorthodox, he left the community only to study law, not music. Hi, Eli. And finally, moderating today's conversation is Yiddish maven Michael Wex, the best-selling author of Born to Kvetch, whose lively and unique approach to Yiddish, to teaching the language, has been dubbed Wexology by his adoring fans in the Yiddish and klezmer communities. Michael grew up in a Yiddish-speaking community in Alberta, Canada, and today is joining us from Toronto. So hello, Michael. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our co-sponsors of today's program, New Yiddish Rep. Special shout out to David Mandelbaum, who helped put this interesting program together. Thank you, David, if you're watching. And finally, please note that this program is being recorded. We will have time for an audience Q&A at the conclusion of the program, so please submit your questions into the chat box, and we will do our very best to get to as many as we can. So that is it from me, and welcome again, Alexa, Eli, and Michael.
Thanks. I guess I'll start off with a general question based around the book, Deborah Feldman's memoir, that the show is based on. And one of the things, and I have to admit that I've not read the book. I've seen the TV show, but I haven't actually read her book. But one of the things that struck me in watching the show, as somebody who also came out of a extreme Orthodox background, was, I guess, the question that people that aren't familiar with that world might have immediately is the degree throughout the show to which members of the Hasidic community seem or emphasize the idea that they are here and that their duty is to replace all the people who were murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. To what degree, I guess the question is the Williamsburg Hasidic community a response to the Holocaust, and to what degree is it simply a continuation of a way of life that was, had been going on for a good couple of hundred years back in Europe? And how much did that play into the way you decided to portray the community and, Esti's dilemmas and Moishe's dilemmas, etc.?
I think this is kind of a two-parted question. To me, I interpret it as a two-parted question.
Sure.
It's about the Williamsburg Satmar community, and I actually want to let Eli speak to that first, maybe in terms of a continuation versus a newly interpreted, and then I'll answer maybe the way we approach that in the show.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good. Eli?
Sure. I'm all too happy to. So there's no question that the Satmar community kind of sees itself as a continuation, as an uninterrupted chain of tradition that goes back to, I'm sure intellectually they realized that things were different before the Satmar dynasty started, and things were different before Hasidus started. But there is a lot of cognitive dissonance about what Judaism looked like before versus what it looks like today. There is this kind of big conceit that happens in the community that says that we always look like this, we always spoke like this, and we always behaved like this. Today, and I remember growing up with this, children's coloring books showing Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob wearing strimals and having long pants.
Still got a couple, yeah.
Do they really believe that intellectually? Probably not, but certainly that's how the children are raised. And that's how people that are less educated, at least about our history, tend to believe. Now, but they do see themselves as a continuation of a long tradition. And how long that is up for debate. But at the same time, they see themselves as having this renewed sense of duty and obligation to rebuild what they lost during the Holocaust. Now, I don't think necessarily their aim is to rebuild all 6 million lost in the Holocaust. Their aim is certainly to rebuild the communities that they lost, and they do believe that that their mission is certainly help repopulate their community, and everything that they do is informed by that. Every child that's born is seen as a direct answer to Hitler. And I think that's something that we try to express in the show.
Yeah, and I mean, because so much of the culture, I mean, there's the religious and the cultural aspect, which of course, I don't need to tell you, in a close-knit community like that is completely intertwined. And one in which that is so, I would say, guided by the trauma of the Holocaust. In a way, it was our show's decision to double down on that by having Esty flee to Germany, right? The country of the original sin. And so, I think certain elements of it are of course part of age-old Hasidic culture, and part of it is playing into the trauma. And I think that is what people can possibly relate to or be disgusted by, who have their own Holocaust trauma or inherited trauma. And it is a great irony that of course Deborah Feldman lives in Berlin, but she came to Berlin under very different circumstances as Esty did. She left the community, and only really years later found her way to Berlin very organically after touring Europe, and still equally as ironic, but still under other circumstances. But yes, of course, like that kind of, it's the doubling down on history. It's being in the source of what you have been raised to think of, the source of all evil in the world, and then realizing that most evil is within ourselves and not in an entire culture. I think. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, again, yes, it does answer the question. One of the things I was wondering about also, though, was the way the Williamsburg community is portrayed. And it's, I have no quarrel with the way it's portrayed. I come from a Polish Hasidic family, and I can remember 1963, 1964, as a little boy. I was in New York with my father, and he grew up as a Hasid in pre-war Warsaw. So completely different world from the Hungarian Hasidic community, like totally different. And we're walking like on Lee Avenue in Bedford and stuff. And this was back, there was a chuppah in front of the Satmar Rebbe's house. because this was about the time that the kids born immediately after the war in the DP camps, for the most part, were starting.
So this is 500 Bedford Avenue.
I guess that's the number. But you know, there'd be like 5, 6, 10 weddings a day. Sometimes it was just like this assembly line of people moving through, and you know, the Rebbe would be there to officiate and stuff. Which, firstly, the idea that the Rebbe would officiate for any zlob out of the community who happened to be getting married, this was a very big deal. This was something that my father, you know, again, coming from Poland, where the Ger Rebbe had, I don't know, 300,000 Chassidim or something. Like, the Ger Rebbe wasn't coming to you ever. That wasn't going to happen. But you know, so the initial move to replenish the people who had been lost was already happening. But my father's walking around and he's staring. He's saying, "Just verglotzt mit den Augen." And he said to me, he said in Yiddish, he said, "The way the Beverly Hillbillies look to you is what these people look like to me." And this is coming from somebody who's wearing a long coat and a big hat and everything else. And he just felt that the mountain world from the Carpathians, which is where most of the people there came from, the immigrants, was a completely other kind of Hasidic settlement, you know, population. And I'm wondering, you know, now, because of who has survived and because of the, I guess, the stubbornness, particularly on the part of the Satmar community, they have become the dominant force in the Hasidic, you know, in much of the Hasidic world, if not all of it. I mean, you're portraying in the show, like, this is one unified world. And I understand that there's only so much you can get into, and you're reflecting Esti's, you know, the people that Esti you're dealing with. But how much of what we see of Chassidus in the show would apply equally to non-Hungarian, non-Romanian, even non-Galician, non-Galicianer, ultra-Orthodox or Hasidic groups? Is it basically the same, or is this unique, specific to the Hungarian community?
But which part?
Which part? Just the attitudes to outsiders, the attitudes within the community, the attitudes to people trying to escape.
It's
are
pretty
these typical, or?
It's pretty universal in the Hasidic world. The one notable exception is really Chabad Lubavitch, which in many respects is less extreme, and in some respects is more extreme. But that's the only Hasidic group that you can really generalize to. All the others have pretty much taken on this very blended approach, blended image. I mean, this happened because for the first time in history, all these Hasidic communities existed in the same space.
Yeah.
They did something akin to what happened with Yiddish. They standardized it. They standardized Hasidic practice. And with, you know, very, very kind of small differences in you know, the music and the dress, and the particular kind of kigel you eat, it's pretty much the same thing under a different name. Now, obviously, within all of these Hasidic communities, there are differences in terms of level of extremism from family to family. Some families are more moderate, and some families are more fundamentalist within each Hasidic group. So there will be differences that are more individual differences than communal differences. But as a community, as a group, the differences are insignificant with respect to the themes that we see in the show.
Yeah, thanks. So we can, if you're watching the show from outside, you can take this as being, had she run away from New Square, for instance, another Hasidic community, the reactions, et cetera, would have been pretty much.
Oh yeah, New Square especially, which is is more insular and extremist than Williamsburg. But again, it's important to note that there are differences among individuals. You certainly don't want to paint all Hasidic people as individuals in the same light. But the communities, by and large, are all built around the same system, the same model, and subscribe as a group to pretty much the same positions. But there are huge differences from family to family. I mean, my family, I have a wonderful relationship with them. I was never cut off. I was never shunned. I don't think I was ever even hung up on. In fact, my mother won't stop calling me. I've probably hung up on her, come to think of it. But yeah, so obviously not every family is like Esti's family, and that's the key point. But as far as the things that relate to the community as a whole, they're very much fungible and generalizable.
And it probably also depends on what type of person leaves as well. I mean, I feel like there are a lot of people who leave also because of their own sexual orientation. And I think that's probably a different thing to wrap heads around in the community as well. It probably has a lot to do with that as well, Ellie, right? I mean, wouldn't you say?
What, in what respect?
In terms of how a community would react to people leaving, probably depends under the circumstances that they leave and why they leave.
Yeah, although I think it depends more on it depends more on the family that person comes from.
Yeah.
Than the actual individual. I mean, if the person comes from a prominent family, chances are it'll be a bigger scandal. It'll be harder for them to leave, and the family might be more in a position of power to do something about it. But if it's a family of quote unquote nobodies, nobody really cares. Unless there are children involved, in which case the community might get involved because they see it as their holy obligation to save the souls of the children. But generally speaking, it would definitely make a much smaller splash.
I don't think this is exclusive to Jewish Hasidic communities. I mean, just from the reactions that we've received to the show from all over the world, any religious community that is more insular poses the same challenges to individuals who don't want to conform or don't feel like they can conform. So I mean, that's actually been one of the best things about the reactions to the shows, that we received them from the Muslim world, like various Christian worlds, various Muslim worlds, Jewish, everything. It's
absolutely.
Yeah,
it's not a Jewish problem; it's a religious problem.
No, it's also in any kind of garrison culture like this, where you feel that you're constantly besieged or under attack from the outside world. I think that's going to come in. Yeah. But again, in the case of somebody like Esti, would Moshe makes it pretty clear that the only reason they're in Berlin chasing her is because they know that she's pregnant. And it's the child. It's, she's already kind of made her own bed, as he says. It's the child that they're interested in. And, I have some personal experience on that kind of thing too. But would they have gone after her? I mean, she's clearly from an unprominent family. Her mother never fit in to start with. The father is a bit of an Oisvorf, you know, he's not a respected member of the community by any means. Would they, yeah, and she marries a guy who's a nice enough guy, but you notice the way he's described before the Bashal is, yeah, there's two brothers, they work in Manhattan, but their father learns all day, right? This is already like, he works. He's not, you know, he's not sitting and learning all day. He's not a member of the minor clergy or anything like that. You know, he's got a job at 47th Street Photo or something. This is not a high prestige union. So had she just left it, you know, had they had that argument right after the Pesach Seder, and she just says, you know, screw you, you know, you want a divorce? You got it, I'm leaving. I've got these papers here that will get me citizenship in Germany. I don't need you. Do you think anybody would have gone after her?
Probably not. I mean, certainly the way that the show was written, it was, I mean, he personally was certainly very much, I mean, he realized that he, on some level, he does love her. And for him, it was really about finding himself and finding his love and finding whether or not he loves her. So there were a lot of complicated emotions around his motivations to go after her. But as far as the community goes, as far as Reb Yossele goes, or as far as Moshe goes, it was always about the baby. In fact, to some extent, once a woman leaves, certainly, but also once a man leaves, I think, even if they come back, they're damaged goods. Especially if a woman leaves, for obvious reasons. And it's less, the stakes are much lower than for an innocent child. So, and that's one of the reasons why I think in the show, it's very clear that she's pregnant, and that's part of the conversation.
Yeah, and I think, you know, your point about never being able to come back, you can see this with Moshe,
yeah,
who basically says that about himself. He's gone, and he's now, he doesn't really, you know, all he can do is the Rebbe sends him out to do stuff that really nobody should be doing, but, you know, it's Moshe, another Oisvorf. I like that he was named Kvetch. I thought that was a nice inside touch. There's a prominent Satmar family by that name.
But it's also a common.
All the names, there's probably a prominent Satmar family. With
but they're all relatively common. So they're not really
no, that's true. But you know,
well, it's funny. After we gave him the name Lefkowitz and already had shot the entirety of the interiors of Williamsburg, Berlin, then the supermarket that we ended up getting in New York, which we shot at the end of our entire shoot, was named Lefkowitz accidentally. And I was like, Ellie, do you not remember that?
No, wasn't it like O&P or something like that?
No. The exterior of the supermarket that we shot in Brooklyn is called Lefkowitz.
Oh, the exterior.
Yeah. The exterior.
Yeah. The interior was not. Okay.
I know. I was like, people are going to think this is Moshe's family's supermarket. And maybe it is.
Yeah, because it's not like amongst the Amish, or who is it, the Amish, where you know you can get a year off.
Yeah,
wasn't there a television show about that? Yeah,
there was.
Yeah, you don't get that. You know, it's 7 days a week of Torah or whatever.
You get that once you get married. I mean, that's really your only.
Moshe is the most tragic character in the show because he can't make it work in either world.
Yeah, and Moshe, of course, you know, there's the old saying, there wasn't a strip club in New York City without its resident chassid, always in a baseball hat, so you wouldn't know that it was a chassid. But yeah, people, you know, like Moshe, end up kind of nowhere.
Yeah.
You know, when he throws himself into, I guess it's the spray, you know, going like, Tata, help me, you know, God, help me. It's, you know, he knows what he is and doesn't seem to be able to control himself or do anything about it. And that's, you know, that's again where you get the real tragedies in things.
I also think that the scene in the fourth episode with Esty on the playground,
Yeah.
in a way,
Well,
he's jealous of Esty as well. He's angry with her because she has all the opportunities. Yeah. She can go home and be a mom. She's pregnant. She is fulfilling her duty as a woman on one hand, and she has a talent and has made friends, and, you know, will probably be okay, has a mother who's also out. I mean, in a way, I think he's also so angry because he doesn't have any of it.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, the fact that he doesn't just grab her and drag her along and say, you know, you're coming with me whether you want to or not, which he seems to be the kind of person who is capable of doing that, I think speaks to his ambivalence about the whole thing, and knowing, you know, right, the knowledge that the Rebbe will send you out to do stuff that basically, you know, as they say in Jewish, spas nicht verkayiden, you know, a Jew should not be behaving this way. You know, he's carrying a gun, noch. You know, he kind of knows that and finds himself, you know, neither here nor there. And again, what's interesting is, though, and this plays into it, he's never going to be able to assimilate completely. We don't know yet about Esty, but there's the language barrier. And I guess one of the things we're supposed to be talking about and that I want to talk about is the role of Yiddish in all of this. I mean, especially somebody who just watches the show because they heard it was good and doesn't know much or anything about these communities, may be somewhat taken aback to see that everybody, down to the smallest children, is speaking a language that is otherwise spoken on a mass basis only in old age homes now, or taught as a heritage thing in universities or online. But these, you know, these people are speaking it always. You know, it is their language. And why, I guess, is the question for you guys. Why Dafke Yiddish, of all things? You know, where there's an entire Litvish world out there, a non-Hasidic, ultra-Orthodox world that functions in the US at any rate, primarily in English now, and has for quite a long time. I grew up during the transition era in those places. And yet they're just as religious as they ever were. In fact, they're probably more religious than they used to be, but they're still speaking English. Why the emphasis on Yiddish here?
In the show, like, why do we decide to make half the show in Yiddish?
Well, I think the show is just reflecting, you know, the reality. So I guess it's both. You know, why would the real people, if this were not a show,
and this is an Ellie question.
But then why did you leave it in the show?
Right.
Well, yeah. Okay. Well, you go first.
I understand Ellie needs to earn extra money, but beyond that,
I would be out of a job. No.
Yeah.
It's really simple, and this is something that actually I wanted to mention earlier, but neglected to. As much as we criticize the garrison complex and the persecution complex and the insularity of the Satmar community specifically, but the Hasidic community overall, they're right. They're absolutely right. The proof is in the pudding. I mean, their retention rate is incredibly high. Thousands of people leave, but many more thousands stay. And the data out there, there's been so much hand-wringing about this. The attrition rate of all the Jewish communities all over the world is incredibly high. Reform Judaism and conservative Judaism is bleeding members and bleeding congregants. And there's a huge disparity between the number of people who leave the other communities and the number of people who leave the Hasidic communities. I suspect that the actual number, is somewhere between 10 and 20% of people who leave the Hasidic community. Although they would claim that it's even lower than that, but 10 to 20% is low enough. More than 80% stay. And the fact is that they're right on a number of levels. They're right that if they would be less insular, if there would be full transparency, if people would have a secular education, if people would have access to secular culture, many more people would leave. If the walls were lower, many more people would leave, because given the choice, most people would not choose that lifestyle. That's not to say that most people who are there are blissfully ignorant, and I'm very happy. Many people are not ignorant and they're still happy, but most people would not start out making that choice given two equally possible options. And this is also, there's the famous passage in the Talmud that the reason why the Jews were redeemed from Egypt is because they did not change their garb, they did not change their language, and they did not change their names. Those are the three vanguards against assimilation. And the Hasidic community takes that literally. And one of the ways in which that and one of the ways in which that is expressed is certainly in language. And it works. I mean,
yeah. Again, Esti's father.
What else can we say about it? It works.
Yeah. No, Esti's grandfather quotes that very passage in the show.
Yes, I forgot. I wrote that passage. I forgot.
But what I find. Were you going to say something, Alexa?
Well, I was going to say. I mean, the Holocaust is similar. I mean, that's why the grandfather says the Nazis. It's the belief that the Holocaust happened because of Jewish assimilation, and working against that.
Well, that's an extreme religious point of view. It's not uncommon, and it's not confined to a Hungarian Hasidim. But that was the dominant view in those communities, and I guess it still is. But certainly pre-World War II.
I do have a question though for Eli. If it's let's say 10 to 20% of people who leave, what is the percentage of people who live kind of on the fringes, kind of not out but not fully in?
Well, that's so much harder to quantify for obvious reasons. But I think also, how do you define that? I mean, most people are not 100% observant 100% of the time. Everybody sins at some point in their lives, whether it's by necessity, whether it's by accident, whether it's just by virtue of the fact that, what do they say? 90% of the people masturbate and they admit to masturbating, and the other 10% are lying. But in Hasidic life, in the Hasidic world, that's a mortal sin, basically, to the extent you can use that phrase in Judaism. And everybody does it. Nobody will admit to it, but everybody does it. So is anybody really 100% religious 100% of the time? But people that are, the number of people that are that don't actually believe, and that only go through the motions, and that given a real choice would have left. I want to say it's another 10 to 20%, but there's no way of really knowing that.
Okay. But one of the things I was wondering about with that, though, not so much the leaving, but using language as a way of preventing assimilation, which is a remarkably successful thing. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, if you came from Poland, before World War II, Yiddish was the dominant language amongst every segment except for the very high assimilated upper classes of Polish Jewry. So Hasidim, communists, and everybody in between spoke Yiddish. Hungary was completely different. Hungary, and in this, Satmar was well prepared for coming to the US. There was a very high degree of linguistic assimilation in pre-war Hungary, and it was basically only the Hasidic or non-Hasidic ultra-Orthodox communities in which Yiddish was still being spoken. Somebody like Jacob Katz, who was a famous Jewish historian, talks about going to yeshiva in Hungary before World War I in Hungarian. And to him, when he finally changed schools and ended up at a place where they were speaking Yiddish, he had to learn the language from scratch.
Yeshiva in Hungarian? Yeshiva?
That's what he says. I don't know what level.
I mean, maybe there was some equivalent to day school, but that's the first I've heard of that.
I don't know at what level. I mean, he ended up in Pressburg at some Cyphers yeshiva. But
right, Pressburg, they certainly spoke Yiddish.
They spoke Yiddish.
My great-grandfather studied there as well.
But the idea that they were already speaking a language that most of the Jewish community had long since abandoned, and yet at least the generation that came over after the war, generally they all spoke fluent Hungarian. And I know kids that I knew then, quite often, many of the women were not such big Yiddish speakers. They hadn't spoken Yiddish before the war. And I knew a number of people who spoke Hungarian with their mothers and Yiddish with their fathers. And this is sort of reflected now you see the women in the show, and I thought this was a very nice touch, use a lot more English in their Yiddish and clearly speak English a lot better than the boys because their education is not as Talmudically intense, I guess. But you would think that when Esti goes to Germany, and this was something I was wondering about, there's an old saying in Yiddish, "Wus fara Yid reit nicht Kadach?" What kind of Jew doesn't speak German? And as somebody who first went to Germany believing that, it doesn't really work that easily, but the idea that she should be able, that she's shocked, she's surprised, let's say, to discover that there are these, as it were, Yiddish words in German or similarities between Yiddish and German. I'm wondering why more wasn't made out of that. It's not a criticism. I was just curious as to why she didn't get off the plane and immediately, go up to someone and say, "No, Dutch, via him, et cetera, like I did."
This was definitely a big conversation. I mean, one of the first conversations Anna, who I created the show with, we created it together, had was, should this show be in German? I mean, in terms of her Berlin experience, do we make her Berlin experience a German experience? Or do we make it an international kind of expat experience? And we decided to go with the international expat experience, also to kind of center it in this Middle Eastern classical music school. And we do have that moment where her and her new friend Dacia kind of joke how these words are similar. So that was kind of our nod to that. We didn't go full on. She goes to like a baker and orders a coffee full in German, because in a way that felt a bit esoteric, and also she's fleeing. So in a way, we also assumed, this is her first time out of the country, fleeing, scared. I think, she had to put also the trauma of her family pretty far away in order to make this step. And in a way, I think in that moment where she orders her coffee, for example, it's also one of those like coffee shops in Berlin where the barista probably barely even speaks German. I mean, Berlin is a really English-speaking city now. It just felt more right to do that. the way we did. But yes, we were thinking about that version for sure. But then, we already committed to making a show that has more Yiddish than any other show basically on TV. Sure, yeah. And we felt we want to put all our energy and language towards that and not start with the kind of, little funny things of that would happen. And it's also a pronunciation thing. And unless you understand German and Yiddish, it's not necessarily funny to all, just funny to some. And then you have to bring that in somehow into subtitle. Then you kind of would open another whole can of worms. So we kind of tried to honor that a bit in that conversation where she talks about genau stimmt, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and I guess one other question before we go to the Q&A, and it's the one that keeps coming up, I notice on my screen, so I will ask it now, is why Dafka Germany? This was, why is she going, everybody says the same thing. It's a cemetery, it's a besoilum. Yet at the beginning, when she first meets Yankel, what does he do? He tells her about his trip to Europe. And where did you go? He tells her all the kforim, all the graves that he went to prostrate himself on. This is Hasidic tourism, I guess. I actually know. But if everything, as Esti says, when she's talking to Moish, if everything is a cemetery, why Dafka this cemetery?
Right.
Why does she, I mean, I understand, within the context of the show, she has her mother's citizenship reclamation papers, but beyond that.
Yeah. Well, what struck me about, getting to know Deborah Feldman and talking to her about why she is in Germany and she is so happy in Germany, what really struck me is how much she hated her life in New York after leaving, and in America, actually, how she felt on some level, for the first time, a kind of homecoming was her trip to Eastern Europe and Germany, a kind of culture that felt closer to the way she grew up, but where she could be free, then a kind of, fast-paced, hyper-capitalistic, scary, existence as a single mom who doesn't have a support network and doesn't have a lot of money, that she had to live through in New York City. And, for her, she didn't, as I said, she didn't come to Berlin like Esti did overnight and stay. This was a year's progress. She visited, at this point, she had released, or she had published Unorthodox, the book. And for her, Berlin was just this place of bicycles, bookstores, people who loved her book. That can't be ignored. She's an intellectual celebrity in Germany. I mean, that's just what she is now. And for Anna and me, the decision to bring Esti to Berlin, we really loved the idea of the irony of it all and throwing her into the source of trauma. And as a Jew who grew up in Germany, where the entire city sometimes feels like a graveyard or with ghosts, or there are spaces that are associated with historical trauma, the idea to give them new meaning, with Esti kind of shedding her wig in the Lake Wannsee, and of course now there's a new association with Wannsee because that's where we shot the show. Kind of doubling down on history in this way and giving things new meaning is something that I find really interesting. So, why Germany? That's why Germany. It's interesting to think about that. You know what I mean? That's why. I think it's sometimes with storytelling really fun, as you know, to push reality or a character into uncomfortable situations and kind of, question pre-existing ideas, and that's how we decided to do it.
Okay, Ellie, did you want to add anything before we go to the Q&A to what Alexa just said?
So much. No, it's really that. It's definitely it's facing your trauma. It's which by the way is the best way to learn about anything about yourself, to figure out who you are, and also to kind of experience for yourself, because so much of our history has been rewritten and retold and revised to fit a certain narrative. And everything we do is kind of under the influence of that. And to kind of explore that and experience that on your own and get to know that on your own is so important. And I feel like this journey into the future can't happen without this journey into the past.
Great, thanks. Okay, Samantha, we're going to bring Samantha back now, and she'll convey some of your questions to us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. We do have a lot of questions, and Alexa, I know that you have to leave on the dot when the hour is up. So I'll do my best to get as many as I can in, but no worries if you have to leave early. Okay, there are a bunch of questions coming in about sort of the differences between ultra-Orthodox communities and insight into Hasidic life. So we don't have much time, and I want to keep the focus on the show and not go too far off on this tangent. But maybe you can speak about the response from the ultra-Orthodox community to the series. Was it positive or negative or mixed?
Eli, you understand Yiddish, so you probably had a larger exposure to the criticism.
Definitely very mixed. First of all, I got to say, it's not like there's a uniform response. There isn't. First of all, there is no single voice that speaks for the Hasidic community, and there isn't even a single voice that speaks for a particular Hasidic community. I mean, Satmar has so many camps and so many spokespeople. You'll never get the same answer twice. But by and large, Hasidic people are insular for a reason. They don't want to be influenced by the outside world. They don't want to be bothered by the outside world. They're not proselytizing. They don't want to be understood. They want to be left alone. So they don't like to be portrayed in any fashion, positive or negative. Certainly when there's any criticism attached to it, they definitely do not like that. Add to that the post-Holocaust trauma, the persecution complex, and it's a bad recipe. That being said, I've gotten hundreds and hundreds of messages from people inside the community saying how much they appreciated the detail, the nuance, the characters, and the core truth behind it. Now, of course, there are an equal number of people, at least, who feel differently about it, and that's fine, and that's their right. But it's definitely the first time, I think, that the Hasidic community has kind of seen themselves reflected in this kind of show, in any TV show for that matter, and it provoked a very powerful response, both positive and negative, because of it.
Thank you, Eli. So our viewer, Elaine, is pointing out a few disparities between the book and the show. For example, the decision to make music such a core element, that was different in the book, and also her mother being presented as a lesbian. What prompted these decisions? Why did you decide to depart from the book in some places and others not?
Yeah. Yes. So, I could safely say that about 70% of the show is invented. In the sense that what is true to the book are most Williamsburg scenes. What, of course, we invented was tying in those Williamsburg scenes into our narrative and into our plot. Deborah's mother, by the way, is a lesbian, also in the book, but that aside, she is not in Germany. As far as I know, she's in New York. And And the reason we did this, by the way, with Deborah's full blessing, is TV is a really different thing than books. I mean, everybody knows who, I feel like I've rarely heard anybody who loves a book in the history of literature who loves the movie of the book they love, right? It's a really different kind of beast because you need to externalize a character and their experience. You're not unless you have a voiceover and you're literally listening to their thoughts in voiceover, you need to give them experiences and you need to develop characters a bit differently. And we did this to give the show a motor. In terms of the music, we didn't think it'd be the most cinematic thing to make her a writer, to be completely honest. Everybody can, and I'd love to know in the chat box the movies that people love about writers where watching people write is really compelling. Because I'd love to see, I think there aren't many. I'm not saying there aren't any, but I don't think there are many. And I'd love to know if there are, because this is something I think about all the time, about how to make writing look compelling and cinematic. Music just felt all, music is for all the senses in a way. And it was funny when we spoke to Deborah about this idea that we're in a way not going to have her want to be a writer. She's not going to be sneaking off to the library, but rather she's going to have these piano lessons. She was the one who said that she actually had secret piano lessons as a child in Borough Park, and she had a fold-out piano. So she gave us the idea of the fold-out piano. And I think, in terms of staying close to the book, Deborah's reaction to the show is that she really relates to it in a universal way, in the universality of Este's feelings and that wanting to be free, and that's the most important thing, And thankfully, we had Eli Rosen to get as much right as we could, I think, for this production. That's why. I could go through every single decision we made and kind of explain, and some of them have a similar explanation, some of them have a different explanation, but in terms of the music, it just felt like something cinematic. It gave us a vehicle to have her meet friends. It gave us something, that we could use. Also, just the fact that women aren't allowed to perform music amongst men.
Awesome, thank you. And so you mentioned that you know Deborah personally. A bunch of people want to know what she is up to today, if you happen to know.
Yeah, Deborah is writing a novel that Deborah's writing her first novel. And she lives in Berlin with her teenage son. Berlin right now is completely heavenly in comparison to, I'm pretty sure, everywhere in the United States in terms of COVID. And yeah, that's what Deborah's doing great. Deborah's doing panels all the time. And I actually haven't spoken to her in a couple of weeks, but last I spoke to her, she was about to go on vacation with her son to Rügen, which is in the northeast of Germany at the ocean.
Awesome.
I was just going to do a panel with her in Poland, of all places. But that was canceled because of COVID.
A lot of things were canceled because of COVID.
Yep.
But silver lining, we're here today on this program, so some good things came out of it. So here's a question, comes from Toby. Toby notes that there have been several books written by people who have left the Orthodox community. And I think a couple years back, this was kind of like a boom in like off the Derek memoirs that were coming out at one point. So what do you think set this book apart from others that contributed to its popularity?
I have to be, I think it's well written. I think it's, not to say the others aren't, okay? I've read a couple, but I'm sure I haven't read all of them. Deborah crafted her story into a really well told story, you know. It has a kind of fairy tale element to it that I think is really attractive to readers. And I think Deborah is exceptional as a figure in the press. And you just need to YouTube Deborah. She really is so good at PR and talking about her work in a way that's it's extraordinary. I mean, you have to imagine she only moved to Berlin a couple of years ago. She goes on to the biggest German talk shows in German. Her German is excellent. And this is something that I think she really always has worked hard in. When after she left she went to Sarah Lawrence, or while leaving, and made sure that she could articulate herself in English as well, if not better, than other people who are around her. You know, she's a survivor, and she's really good.
In fact,
I don't know. I mean, why? I mean, maybe this is a question for readers, right? You know, we decided to do Unorthodox because also we met Deborah and we knew her, and it kind of over time developed into this idea. But it wasn't that it happened from the inside out. It's not like we really wanted to do a show about a Hasidic person leaving their community and then we read everything and decided for this one. That's not how it happened. We really, it kind of, yeah, it came from the inside out.
Well, you wanted to add something?
Well, I was just going to say her German is so good now that she forgot her Yiddish.
Oh.
It's not funny. We did voiceovers for the show, just kind of casual conversation. And we recruited everybody we could in Berlin for it. And there weren't a lot of obvious Hasidic female Yiddish speakers in Berlin. So we used Deborah for that. And she was really concerned. She wanted me to write lines for her. She was concerned she would not be able to extemporanealize in, I completely screwed up that word.
Okay.
That she wouldn't just be able to talk in Yiddish, but yeah, her German.
Melissa Weiss was there that day, who's also an actor on our show, and she and Deborah got into it real quick. I have to leave in a second, so if there's one more question that I can address from our side. Yeah.
There's a burning question. So many people want to know, will there be a sequel?
There will not. I'm sorry to say.
You've heard it here. Alexa, I don't want to keep you. I know that you have to leave. Thank you so much for joining us today, you guys. Yeah, it was lovely. It was a pleasure to have you, Ellie, Alexa, Michael. If you haven't seen the show, go out and see it. Read Deborah's book. Read Michael's book, Born to Kvetch. I'll send out a link to all of those things in my follow-up email. And stay tuned for upcoming MJH Live programs. We do them Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.